The Ravens can't make this mistake. I've been seeing so many mock drafts. Mel Kiper's sticking with his guns of the Ravens going safety. I've been seeing a lot of Ravens fans say that they want a safety now. The mock drafts always kind of influence the narrative of, where the team's going to go, even though they really have no idea. And I'm not mad about us taking a safety in the first round. But what this has caused is a lot of talk around how we shouldn't take a guard in the first or even second. A lot of people are saying, get a guard later in the draft. There's a lot of depth at guard in this draft. There's a lot of tackle depth as well. And while I agree that we can add depth, I don't want to lose sight of what the main mission is, what the main takeaway from after last season is, and that is stack the trenches. That has not changed. Our offensive line needs competition, especially at the guard spot. Now, a lot of people think Voorhees and Falele are going to be the starting left guard and right guard, and I'm fine with that. I'm praying they take a leap. I'm praying they get better. I would imagine they will be better from last year. It was their first year. I'm fine if they end up winning the job. I'm rooting for them. I'm rooting for the best Ravens offensive line possible. But I think we need to draft a guard in the early rounds of the draft, a starting caliber guard, whoever they see fit as that guy. And we need to let them compete and let the best man win. But I don't want to just add, deeper depth in the draft where they're not really ready and they don't really come in and have a chance to start. And it's just, Voorhees and Falele are obviously the best guys. We need to push them. I think that is the weakness of our offensive line, and it's not a knock specifically on them. They were thrown into a bad situation last year, in my opinion, where we went really young on the offensive line. Voorhees had never played a game in the NFL. Falele has never started consistently, has never played guard, was always a tackle early in his career. So a lot of growing pains to go through and fight through. Totally get it. Not knocking them as individual players. They need to step up this year and be a lot better. But I think the team needs to do their job of adding really strong competition to those guard spots so that we have a real battle. I don't think it should be, it's probably going to be Voorhees. It's probably going to be Falele. Falele's a free agent after this season. Is he our long-term guard answer? If not, we already need a replacement for next year. So guard is essential. And I would not ignore that in the first, second, third round. Third round's even a little scary for me, but if they like a guy that they think can come in and compete right away and he's in the third round or falls to them in the third, then I'm fine with that, whoever it ends up being. But I don't think we should just write off not taking a guard in the first round if a really solid starting guard falls to us in the first round. It's not a bad move to take that. I know we have other pressing positions. I'm totally with you. I think safety is a need. And the first round, I'm a little more lenient with just go best player available. If that ends up being a starting free safety that can roam the back end and free Kyle up now, beautiful. I'm fine with that. I understand that's a need. I don't think it's as pressing of a need as stacking these trenches up, though. And that also means on the defensive side of the ball. I don't think we should go D-tackle in the first round unless a freak like Harmon falls. I saw McShay mock Harmon today. That would make sense. I think a rotation of Travis Jones and Harmon and Matabike inside is crazy. And the Ravens would have all the depth in the world right there and put some pressure on some teams. But we also need an edge. I think edge is more pressing. This is a deep D-tackle class. I think we can find a rotational, solid D-tackle, maybe even a Travis Jones-esque D-tackle in the third or fourth round. We got Travis Jones in the third round. Is that guy going to come in and get a bunch of playing time right away? Probably not, but we don't really need that. We need a rotational guy. At edge, I think we have a bigger hole. I think edge is kind of as big of a need as guard. The future looks bleak there to me. What is going to happen with Owe after this season? Kyle Van Noy's probably going to retire soon. Ajabo hasn't really worked out so far. We don't know what we have with Adisa Isaac. I like Tavius Robinson, but he's more of a run defender, set the edge guy. He's not an elite pass rusher. So from a pass rushing standpoint, we're pretty thin right now as we stand, unless Ajabo or Adisa Isaac really take a leap. And then if we lose Owe, if we decide not to pay him, which is going to be difficult, we are extremely thin at edge heading into next year. So edge is a massive need, and I wouldn't mind going there in the first round, but don't write off going guard. I know a lot of fans are like, we don't need a guard in the first round, and I'm not arguing that we need one in the first round. But by round 3, we better have drafted a guard. We better add competition, because I don't think Voorhees and Falele should be unchallenged. That's my biggest takeaway. It's not that I'm saying Voorhees and Falele shouldn't start. If they earn the job, by all means, man, I'm rooting for you. Go out there and thrive. But if they're not pushed with starting caliber guard competition, that worries me, because we saw the weakness of our offensive line last year was the guard play, was the interior. We got moved around. And Voorhees didn't even start for most of the year, so it's kind of an unknown. I know he came in week 18 and had some really solid reps, and that gives me hope. But I don't think that he should be unchallenged, and I really just don't want the Ravens to make that mistake of ignoring the offensive line again. Going with Voorhees and Falele just because they're there and they're going to be okay. I know they'll be all right. I'm not saying that they're going to be awful. I think they'll be better than they were last year, and they were getting better last year, especially Falele. Voorhees in week 18 came back and to me looked better than he had all season. So they did progress last year, and I would expect another leap up. So they may be the starting guards, and if they earn it, awesome. But man, don't make the mistake of not adding a lot of competition to that position. And what are we doing next year? We don't have Falele. Are we really going to re-sign him? Is that our future guard for years to come? Maybe, but you just can't ignore the offensive line. We need to protect Lamar Jackson. How many times last year was Lamar under insane pressure? We go against talented fronts, we get moved. We even got moved in that Buffalo game, and to me, they didn't even have that talented of a front. I'm not saying their front was awful, but it was smaller. It was not as strong as fronts like Pittsburgh or Philly, Cleveland even. We got moved around in some of those games. I remember the Raiders in week 2 moved us around bad. The Chiefs moved us around. Philly really moved us around. We saw that again in the Super Bowl. Obviously, their front's ridiculous, but are you trying to win a Super Bowl? You might have to face Philly. That's my concern here, is that we need to stack this offensive line. The offensive line needs to be the strength of this team. It shouldn't even be a question. I'd rather wait on safety and deal with Kyle Hamilton playing in the back end and keep our Darius Washington where he's at. I'd rather deal with that and maybe add a depth safety in the second, third, fourth round, whatever, and then we can attack safety again the following year if we still need that. Say we move on from our Darius, we want to move Kyle back to having freedom to move around. We can go get a safety early round next year. I don't think it's as pressing of a need. And I do understand best player available. I do agree in the first round we should go best player available. If there's really not an edge we love there, if there's really not a guard we love there, but there's a freak safety that falls, then draft the safety. I'm not arguing that pick. But I think guard and edge are way more pressing needs. And I know the Ravens don't draft needs usually, but I think the offensive line needs to be priority. There's not a lot of free agents out there. We'll see if a guy ends up getting cut. Maybe an older veteran gets cut. We usually do capitalize on one or two of those moves later in the offseason. So I know there's still potential to add to this room. And I'd like to say the Ravens aren't going to neglect the offensive line. I really believe that they are a well-ran organization, that they make smart, intelligent moves for the best interest of this team winning a championship. But last year kind of scared me a little bit with their decision making. They went very young, very risky with the offensive line. They let Zeitler go. You could have signed Zeitler back for cheap and locked down the right guard spot. You let Zeitler go, and then you end up starting a 7th-round pick coming off an injury in Voorhees. He ends up getting hurt again. They put McCary in. You end up going with your developmental right tackle and moving him to guard in Falele. And it's just a bunch of unknowns, a bunch of projects, and that's kind of how it played out. Our offensive line was not the strength of our team. I know Roger Rosengarten was a hit. Not knocking him. I think our tackles are set. Ronnie Stanley, Roger Rosengarten, I trust. Tyler Linderbaum in the middle, I trust. But you can't have weaknesses at guard. And if Falele and Voorhees aren't a lot better, our offensive line, in my opinion, going against really, really talented fronts is going to be an issue again. Is it going to kill us in the regular season? Probably not. We might lose a game or two because Lamar's under pressure and they get a fumble or whatever. Like it might kill us for a game or two, but during the regular season, I think we can plow through it. But what happens when we get to the playoffs and we need to consistently win in the trenches? I haven't seen it. I saw it against Pittsburgh last year, and I thought we were headed in that direction, and then we get moved all around in Buffalo, and we're turning the ball over left and right. And if we would have went to the Super Bowl, our line would have got moved again against Philly. Now, Lamar could probably make some crazy things happen more than Mahomes did to get out of some of that pressure. We have the best quarterback at getting out of pressure, which makes our offensive line better. But if you're just watching the offensive line, we don't have an elite offensive line. We don't have a top 5 offensive line in the NFL. Now, we'll see where it goes this year. I think a lot of these young guys could really step up. Roger Rosengarten could play at a Pro Bowl level, and then all of a sudden, our offensive line gets a lot better. But just based off last year, it's scary just rolling in with this offensive line without bringing in a lot of competition. I want Voorhees and Falele to feel like they got a starting guard breathing down their neck to take over. That needs to be the scenario throughout camp. And then you're going to have to make another decision next year with Falele being a free agent. So it doesn't hurt to bring in guard. And I don't mean late in the draft depth. I know it's a deep class. I know we're going to draft a tackle in the 5th round who ends up starting 2-3 years from now. That's awesome. But that doesn't help us this year. And the Ravens need to win a Super Bowl right now. So I know we'll add depth. We got 11 draft picks, but only 3 of them are in the first 3 rounds. So it's not like we have a ton of draft picks. We have a normal amount of draft picks in the early rounds, which is really who's going to be the guys that contribute this season. The Ravens don't play a lot of 4th, 5th, 6th rounders in year 1. Maybe on special teams or something, but we have not seen many draft picks later in the draft play a lot in year 1. 2-3 years down the road, sure. Some of them pan out and add a lot to this team. And I know we'll probably hit on a chunk of those 11 picks later in the draft. I get it. I trust Eric DeCosta to make good moves. But we cannot afford to make the mistake of not bringing in guard competition within the first 3 rounds. I'm screaming it from the mountaintops, man. I don't want people to just write that off and act like we are so good on the offensive line. So that's my rant for today. I've been seeing a ton of mock drafts and not a lot of guards taken high in these mock drafts. And a lot of people saying like, oh, well, we're fine on the offensive line. Voorhees and Falele are going to start. The team loves them. And there's a lot of depth later in the draft where we can add guard tackle depth and be fine. And I just don't think that's the move. I do not think that's the move. That shouldn't be the move. I'm not saying that wouldn't work out. Voorhees and Falele could be the answer, and it works out. And I'll be happy. I'll be happy if we have a strong offensive line, however that plays out. But I'd rather take the approach of adding so much competition to the trenches, to the offensive line especially, and at edge. Add so much competition that everybody has to elevate their game. You got to play locked in and pissed off snap after snap because there's a dude who's ready to take your spot behind your back. And I just feel like the Ravens don't have that kind of offensive line competition right now. Maybe Ben Cleveland. Maybe we see a different Ben Cleveland, but he hasn't even really been given a chance to push and hasn't pushed, clearly. So it needs to be more than that. And I know we'll add to the offensive line, but I think we need to do it in the early rounds. It doesn't have to be round one. I'm not sitting here screaming that we need to go round one guard. I get that we could take a safety, we could take an edge rusher, we could take a freak D tackle that falls, we could take a wide receiver. I don't know. I get that we're going best player available, and I agree with that strategy. But let's go find a Roger Rosengarten that plays guard in the second round then. But to not bring in a lot of competition is a big mistake. So we'll see how it plays out. Let me know what you guys are thinking about this. Where would you guys go in the first 3 rounds? What is the most pressing position need in your opinion? Appreciate you guys, as always, for tuning in to another episode of the Flock Rundown. Have a beautiful rest of your day, and I'll let the greatest linebacker in the history of the game take us out.
Ravens Flock. The Flock Rundown is the place to be. My man Ryan has been a lifelong Ravens fan since he was born. The Flock Rundown. Nothing gets better than waking up and wondering how high we can fly. Tune in.
Motionless brainwaves attempt to swim their way to sense, can't tame the untamed.